Before we get started, there will be spoilers for the 1000-Year Blood War arc of Bleach in the video to come. Before the 1000-Year Blood War arc began, I thought I had a pretty good idea of what the standard Quincy was like, having built up an image of them in my head over the years. Stoic, cold, calculating, and ruthless with a great deal of pride behind their bow. Admittedly, that vision of the archetypal Quincy had been formed through exposure only to the Ishida family, but then that's all we had to go on. So it was quite a shock to the system when the Sternritter arrived in full, bearing all manner of different colourful personalities, designs, and wacky abilities that didn't seem to fit the more traditional, albeit narrow view of the Quincy we were long accustomed to. It certainly seemed, to me at least, that my long-standing idea of what a Quincy actually was, what they were actually like, had to change. It turned out, however, as we reached the final act of the war, that there was still room among the Sternritter for a Quincy of this nature and calibre, one who embodied the stern, unforgiving pragmatists we had come to know. Sternritter X The X-Axis Lille Barro, the leader of Yhwach's Schutzstaffel and the first Quincy to be bestowed a shrift. A man on the outskirts of being a god, in his own words. When I was reading the chapters as they released weekly, I remember thinking Lille was the boring member of the squad, a straight-laced, all-business, down-to-brass-tacks zealot who lives for nothing but to serve Yhwach. As the years went by, however, I realised how ultimately misguided that was, and how Lille's demeanour and personality was the perfect complement to his skill set, and how that unfailing zealotry was what made him truly dangerous among the Sternritter. In more ways than one, Lille is the picture of the perfect Quincy. Even his shrift, the X-Axis, makes him the master of long-range combat, and I love that. Lille gets one of the 1000-Year Blood War arc's best fights, and as you'll see when we get there, I enjoy that by the end of it, even with Lille's many transformations and divine, frankly absurd abilities, the majority of his offensive capabilities ultimately still boil down to just long-range blasts. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here. Lille is one of the final villains introduced in Bleach, and I think he makes quite the impression, becoming easily one of the strongest Sternritter of them all. And frankly, I think an argument can be made for him being the mightiest of the bunch. When the Schutzstaffel were introduced late into the series, it was a tumultuous time for the Sternritter in general. Many of them were being introduced and then killed off within the span of a couple of chapters at maximum, such as Nyanzol, and we were about to experience the Armageddon wrought on the remainder by the Valen. I think readers' patience with them as a faction was at an all-time low. As an enemy group, outside of 1, 2, maybe 3 select members, they'd never really been allowed to blossom beyond being simple battle fodder. After all, is there a point to these guys outside of being mere obstacles, really, if we're never allowed to get to know them? But something was different about the Schutzstaffel from the off. Their presence, their power, their place within the Empire itself. We didn't know it at the time, but we were meeting the villainous faction that would stay with us now until the end of Bleach itself, and Lille played a huge part in making them feel as threatening as they did, and going on to back that up. They're Yhwach's royal guard for a reason, and while we might never quite get to know them per se, I think they absolutely live up to their name and rank. So in today's character analysis video, we're going to dedicate some time to their leader, Lille Barro, Yhwach's holy messenger of God, and a deadly sniper with incredible power backed by an ironclad faith. Did Lille succeed as a villain of the 1000-Year Blood War arc? How does he stack up to his fellow Sternritter comparatively, and what do we think of his position and role in the wider story of Bleach? And while we stick generally to the source material in these videos, how has the anime transformed and evolved Lille's role so far? Let's take a look. So, who is Lille Barro? Sadly, we don't know much about him, which is a real shame, as based on the snippets that we do know, the absolute morsels of a possible backstory, I think he could be a fascinating character and a real insight into the history of both Yhwach and the Vandenreich itself. Lille considers himself to be Yhwach's masterpiece, his greatest creation, the ultimate warrior of God who lives to serve, and to be fair, based on what he's capable of, it's hard to disagree. He truly does represent perhaps the greatest the average Quincy can aspire to be. And by that, I'm not calling Lille himself average, merely trying to differentiate between the true Quincy, such as Yhwach, who possess the eyes of the Almighty, the parts of the Soul King, and then the rest, of which Lille is clearly at the summit. Of course, Lille being the first Quincy to receive a shrift from Yhwach calls into question the timeline of the existing Quincy Empire. It's possible Lille was around during the time of the Lichtreich, though he wasn't a member of the Schutzstaffel at that point. While I don't think it's confirmed, I think it's fairly agreed upon by the community at this point that the Shrifts are a more modern invention and likely weren't being employed by Yhwach 1,000 years ago. That being said, if they were, then Lille is over 1,000 years old, along with several of the other first-generation Sternritter. It is a little odd to me that Hashwolf wasn't the first Quincy to be given a Shrift. I'm not really sure why that would be, and again, we've got nothing to go on. Yhwach simply decided upon Lille above all others for reasons unknown. It's possible the very idea of a Shrift, carving a letter into one's soul, felt a bit experimental at the time and maybe dangerous, but Lille, being as devout as he is, offered his soul up to Yhwach. And so that would make sense to me. Perhaps Lille being the first to receive a Shrift had nothing to do with Yhwach choosing him, but Lille instead making the choice to offer himself up. Lille's lifespan in the source material isn't particularly long. He first appears in chapter 599, and his final appearance is only in chapter 654. While that might not seem like a lot of time to spend with him, the truth is that Lille appears a lot during that span, quickly becoming one of the most exposed Sternritter. In that sense, while I would have liked him to appear earlier, even just a hint at his existence, which they thankfully did in the anime, he and the other Schutzstaffel play their part as the final villains well, intimately involved in the transformative events of the final third of the arc. That being said, going back to this idea of Lille being the first to receive a Shrift, I think questions need to be asked about what makes Lille so special. Among the Schutzstaffel, we have two pieces of the Soul King in Gerard and Pernida, so it makes sense that they would be godlike beings, but why is the same true of Lille? It's often said that one of the things that's so great about Askin is that he's just a guy who finds himself surrounded by all of these impossible deities, but why isn't the same true for Lille? Ostensibly, there's nothing particularly special about him. Like I said earlier, he seems to just represent the ultimate Quincy. But does that really allow him to trespass into the realm of godhood in the ways that he does? Lille is so absurdly powerful, as we see in his battle with Kyoraku, that I wonder how he attained that strength at all. The strength to, quite literally, become an immortal seraph of pure light is nothing to be sniffed at. Now, of course, there's bound to be so much history surrounding the Schutzstaffel that we simply don't know, as of course Lille has seemingly been a part of these guys for, well, however many years. Askin was the only one to be promoted from the lower ranks, so there is potentially a lot going on with the original trio of Lille, Gerard and Pernida that we simply have no idea of. Is all of this just because he was the first to receive a Shrift? His holy form, or forms I should say, do seem directly, intimately tied to the X-Axis, so it's possible Yhwach just infused a ton of angelic power into Lille directly, perhaps as a reward for stepping forward and being the first to accept Yhwach's graces. Perhaps the likeliest answer is that Kubo just wanted him to be a badass as the leader of the Schutzstaffel, but still. So as you can see, there are a lot of questions swirling around this character. I don't necessarily think we needed more time with Lille, I just want a few more answers. Any insight into his history would be greatly appreciated in the future, and considering how the anime has already slightly altered, or at the very least expanded on his role by actually showing us the battle with the Zero Division, I'm definitely a little optimistic regarding the characterization of the Schutzstaffel moving forward. Lille's visual design is an interesting one. Personally, I think he looks incredibly slick, and once again Kubo impresses me with his ability to continuously craft a character the likes of which we've never seen before in the series. By the time we reached the 1000-Year Blood War arc and had met 5 different variations of Aizen, I'm joking, but really, what is it with Aizen's face and cropping up all over the place? Individuality and originality of design was something I was really looking for in these late-stage character introductions, and Kubo killed it with a lot of the Sternritter, including Lille. There's a lot to like about Lille's appearance, from his very unique bicorn and his surprisingly intricate-looking yet stylish outfit complete with a dark green fur trim, to the massive X crosshair tattooed over his closed eye. Perhaps the only standout oddity to me here is his sniper rifle diagram. It's just a weird and awkward looking weapon, though Kubo has always drawn guns strangely in my opinion. In fact, I think of the 3 notable gun users in Bleach, really only Robert wields more standard, traditional looking pistols. Even Stark's guns looked a little uncanny and bizarre, but I do like the fact that Diagram is explicitly mentioned to be Lille's bow. That's a really nice little detail, and frankly, a lot of work went into Lille's design. And I appreciate the more superfluous aspects, the frills, as much as any of it. For example, when Lille activates his Vollständig, unlike a lot of the Sternritter who all transform in the exact same way, as if to elevate him further, Kubo gave Lille an elaborate transformation process which looks amazing. Opening his tattooed eye, the tattoo itself suddenly glows, lifting from Lille's face, the light from it shooting outwards before whirring and spinning rapidly as Lille is enveloped in a huge, glittering 5-pointed star, complete with regal fleur-de-lis topping the ends. Visually, it's a fantastic sequence that immediately helps Lille stand out and crucially tells the reader that this is going to be a transformation unlike any we have seen from the Sternritter to date. By doing so, it adds major gravitas to Lille releasing his holy form. Also, presumably this means the tattoo was his Quincy cross all along. Anyway, speaking of Lille's holy form, let's talk about the design of that for a moment, as this is where the character starts to lose some people. For his initial transformation, Zilliel, known as the Judgement of God, Lille begins his turn towards the truly angelic. His once human body is completely lost, sealed now inside a strange gown of sorts, his arms totally removed, his legs sharpened down to points. I actually like the detail that his arms are seemingly gone, for he no longer has any need for them. Everything about Lille's holy form is designed to facilitate the X-Axis in its purest form. In other words, he's all about blasting sinners with his holy rays. He's now sprouted 8 enormous feathery wings, each of which can fire energy beams from the holes running along their centre, and so no longer has any need for his rifle or anything to hold it with. His head is barely visible, poking up from inside a cavernous collar, while a broad halo encircles him from above. On closer inspection, something really weird is going on inside that gown. Lille no longer has a mouth, and instead the bottom half of his face just melts into a twisting mess of light. As the fight progresses, Lille's form becomes even more abstract, the base of the gown unravelling to reveal 2 alien-looking hind legs that split off into dual prongs at the knee. For the record, I totally get what Kubo is going for with this design. As Yhwach's holy messenger, the one who spreads the gospel and justice of his majesty, purging sinners, Lille is very much a divine being, one of the closest examples of a true deity we've seen in Bleach so far. As a result, his outward appearance is supposed to be nearly incomprehensible to human beings and presumably Shinigami alike, which is a little ironic when they're all technically gods too. But why is he like this? He barely resembles his previous self at all, which is perhaps the point, but it made it difficult for readers to reconcile that they were even the same person. Perhaps it simply is a result of his extreme zealotry. Putting him so close to God has yielded this kind of result. Again, Lille feels like Kubo's attempt at creating the ultimate Quincy, and since they all have angelic forms, his is simply the next step up. Personally, I do think this form looks a bit silly. I appreciate how dangerous it is, but it feels oddly undercooked, and there are some shots of Lille where he really does look rather strange. For example, when he's blasted by Kyoraku's bankai, he kind of just looks like this weird rectangular banana. His body is now just essentially a box, and that really comes across in that particular shot, and it doesn't really translate, not in my opinion at least. However, as the fight continues, Lille is decapitated by Kyoraku's bankai, forcing another transformation upon the Quincy. His head reforms in a display of light, and now any semblance of the man he once was is totally gone. Instead, Lille has become some kind of eldritch monstrosity, the head of a cherubim attached to an elongated, almost draconic neck. Kubo is now more overt with the biblical themes than ever. Lille's head is like that of a child, a cherub's with thick, fair, curly hair, yet his facial features are those of an owl, his massive disc-like eyes clicking and clacking as they open and close individually of one another. As the battle continues, his arms also return to him, now segmented and capable of unleashing powerful, rigid blasts that can decimate entire portions of a city. So, as you can see from a visual design standpoint, this is where we have now gone totally off the reservation with this character. Kubo is going all in on turning Lille into an unrecognisable abomination, and I kinda like it. I appreciate that Lille, the Lille we originally knew and were introduced to, is essentially all but gone at this point, and while this might be where some people totally clock out of this character entirely, and I can understand that, especially when his head starts inflating and contorting, for me it is kind of the opposite. For a fitting analogy, it's kind of like when a joke is funny at first, but then goes on and on to the point where it just stops being funny and just gets kind of awkward. However, it then keeps on going and eventually becomes funny again due to how long it's been going on for, the sheer absurdity of the situation. That's kind of how I feel about Lille's form. Here, with this second transformation, it feels like Kubo really just commits to it and goes all in, and I actually like it quite a lot. I actually respect now more what he's trying to do. And it actually makes me wonder as well, if Lille's head had been destroyed again, say Kyoraku had used his bankai a second time, would he transform into something even more monstrous? Or if, say, his arms were both destroyed, would they return in an even stranger way than they are now? Sure, Lille is barely recognisable now, both in terms of his appearance and his personality, which I'll admit has sadly become quite one-note by this point, but he's extremely imposing and very creepy, and it works really well. It really feels to me like Kyoraku and Nanao are facing down a holy guardian of sorts. Again, I'm not sure how Lille was able to achieve this kind of power or why he qualifies for it, but regardless, I think it really works. And then, once Lille's godly power is split and shattered into pieces by Nanao's sacred Zanpakuto, Lille quite literally plummets from heaven down to the Soul Society, where we're treated to his final look. This is a lot of visual design for one character, and it is by far his absolute worst. In this form, Lille has been stripped of most of his strength, his halo destroyed. He's been cast down and reduced now to numerous strange, squawking flamingos. Even hearing myself say that sentence, it doesn't really sound real. In this form, he is completely ridiculous, having lost all sense of danger and especially dignity, which again is perhaps the point as he's supposed to now be a fallen angel, but I just don't think it was necessary at all, and it feels so silly. Ranting and raving as his head contorts and twists and swirls and spins around, malformed as though it were made of jelly, the Lille we were introduced to is long gone. Hell, these birds actually chirp. And also, how does this even work? Do they act like clones? Is there one that's the true Lille? Or are they all technically him, since they all were dispensed from the same body? Therefore, do they all share the same intelligence? Or has Lille's original intelligence now been split among them? Crucially, why did this even need to happen? Just to reintroduce Izuru for a single chapter? It would have been a much more dignified and frankly memorable and fitting end to Lille's character, in my opinion, to have skipped this completely, and simply have him be destroyed by Nanao's weapon, or an alternate ending to the fight which we'll go over a bit later. I quite like the design choice to have these forms be so tall that the top half of them is often obscured by shadow, leaving only their glowing eyes. It's a little bit haunting, but it's not enough to warrant this form's existence. So, all in all, a real mixed bag as far as Lille's visual design goes. His base look is excellent, but over time he becomes completely unrecognisable in more ways than one. Eventually it goes so far as to work for me again, but then Kubo proceeds to keep going and oversteps his bounds, taking the character firmly into the realm of the ridiculous. Before we move on to Lille's role within the story itself, I want to dedicate some time to talking about his Schrift, the X-Axis, as it really does define his character in many ways. As I mentioned in my recent video ranking the Bambis, the Sternritter Schrifts often bleed over into the Quincy themselves, manifesting whether in their appearance or personality or sometimes both. With Lille, we see the X-Axis in his straightforward and to-the-point approach, which contrasts nicely with Kyoraku's more aloof demeanour when they later clash. A good example of Lille's personality shining through against an opposing force like that would be when Kyoraku is trying to chat with him about Nanao before their battle really gets underway in very typical Kyoraku fashion, but Lille is having none of it, cutting through the chatter by instantly asking if Kyoraku is done with his charade. One thing I have to say though, is that I think the X-Axis is genuinely one of the cleverest abilities, maybe even concepts, that Kubo has ever come up with, and I really mean that. You have to imagine, when designing abilities and powers around the alphabet, that certain letters might pose more of a problem than others, and X is definitely one of them. But coming up with the X-Axis and turning that concept into a sniper is just pure genius. Because of course Lille is always firing on the X-Axis, everything he does runs along that route for the most part. I love the relative simplicity around the ability as well, the idea that everything between the barrel of his gun and his designated target is completely obliterated without prejudice and cannot be blocked. That's a badass, easy to comprehend power that's also deadly, and we see it used numerous times to great effect. Watching Lille punch holes through characters like Uetsu, Hisagi and Kyoraku with ease. I also love how smartly it's used in the anime as well, with Uetsu misunderstanding the power, thinking Lille won't shoot him because his blast will hit Yhwach as well, only to realise the strike stops upon hitting its intended target and going no further. It's a great sequence. Of course, a little like the progression of Lille's visual design, the ability grows more complex the more we learn about it, until it starts to feel a little abstract. Lille's the X-Axis has a second secret function: intangibility. By using the true power of the X-Axis, Lille is able to phase through any and all enemy attacks. How Kubo came to this application is actually fairly smart too. It's a reversal of the fact that Lille's attacks can pass through anything unabated. By applying the X-axis to his own body instead, all attacks now pass through him. Lille can only activate this power briefly upon opening his left eye, and even then, he's only allowed to open that eye when he has a near-death experience during a fight. And then, when he's been forced to open his eyes 3 times in a single battle, he's able to activate his holy form and take things to the next level. Supposedly, the idea behind this is he's only allowed to open his left eye during times of crisis, because otherwise it would be unfair to those facing him. But who is setting these arbitrary rules? Did Yhwach somehow impose this upon him when granting him this power? If so, why? Wouldn't Yhwach want his foremost soldier to be as strong as physically possible? Also, in regards to this idea of Lille opening his left eye several times throughout a fight, I really wish Kubo had actually shown that during Kyoraku's battle, rather than retroactively saying Lille opened his eyes during these moments when you can quite clearly see that hasn't actually happened. It would be really awesome in the anime if he does very briefly open his eye to go intangible against Kyoraku in those sequences, and maybe Kyoraku wonders what's going on, but even not, it's enough to get the audience wondering. Anyway, I do like the X-axis. It's one of my favourite shrifts, and I think it's very fitting for one of the Vandenrijk's absolute elite. And so, regarding his role in Bleach, while Lille is one of the final characters introduced in the series, he leaves a big impact nonetheless. Acting as Yhwach's most devout soldier, he paves the way for the total takeover and collapse of the royal palace before finally engaging in one of the longest fights of the entire story to date. While Lille doesn't appear until chapter 599 in the source material, I just want to briefly mention his first showing in the anime. There, he appears much earlier, standing upon the stage at Yhwach's proclamation alongside his king. I was very pleased to see this. I've said it before, that the Schutzstaffel, or some of them at least, should have been at the gathering of the Sternritter in chapter 543, if only to tease their existence and make the readers curious about them, rather than have them come out of nowhere later on. Sure, considering they're in the upper echelon of the Empire, it doesn't make sense for them to be actively hanging out with the rabble, so I love the way the anime chose to do it. While it does make Yhwach look a little more magnanimous, allowing them to stand with him, it also gives them a sense of power and helps to highlight the hierarchy, or at the very least the divide, among the Sternritter a little better. So on the whole, while Lille simply stands in silence, it was a great addition for the character. Moving on though to the character's first appearance in the source material, we arrive at chapter 599. Once Senjumaru has killed Sternritter W, the wind Nyanzol Weisel, and sent his body hurtling back towards the Seirete, she proclaims that the divine soldiers will now be able to reach Yhwach. In response, the Quincy King summons more Soldat to battle them, before directing his attention to Senjumaru herself. As Yhwach's shadow morphs once more, 4 towering figures emerge, with Yhwach proclaiming them to be his royal guard. Standing at the front of the group is Sternritter X The X-Axis Lille Barro, who watches as Gerard Valkyrie launches the first attack upon Senjumaru. As Senjumaru's defences are overcome and destroyed by Gerard and Pernida, Lille then removes his cloak, revealing his colossal rifle. Lifting the gun, he tells Senjumaru that the losing side is always too slow to react, and that the royal palace had fallen from the moment Yhwach stepped foot on this holy ground. Lille then blasts Senjumaru, punching a hole straight through her head. I don't think that anyone actually believed Senjumaru had died here, but it was still a shockingly brutal moment, and an excellent introduction to both Lille and his power. With Senjumaru's body crumpling to the floor, Gerard barks at Lille, ordering him to clean up the mess in front of his majesty. As I've said before, this interaction doesn't really track with Lille being the so-called unquestioned leader of the Schutzstaffel, so I wonder if that was decided upon a bit later by Kubo. As Gerard laments how pathetic the Zero Division turned out to be, Lille then shoots down the city surrounding the royal palace in an awesome visual, the enormous disc-like platforms dropping out of the sky in plumes of smoke and fire. Turning to Yhwach, Lille bows to him, asking him to please proceed, but suddenly the ruse is revealed, and the backdrop surrounding the Sternritter is unveiled as a fake, constructed and weaved by none other than Senjumaru herself. As the true palace is exposed, Lille tries to shoot it, but finds himself trapped within an enormous cage made of tree trunks which rise up around the platform and encase the Schutzstaffel. Lille finds that his X-Axis is unable to penetrate the cage. Blasting the tree simply causes it to grow back, while trying to shoot through the bars causes a branch to grow there instantaneously. Uetsu Nimaya appears on the walkway with his unstable Zanpakuto sire Fushi and challenges the Schutzstaffel. As Lille watches Gerard be instantly cut down in front of him, he tries to blast Uetsu. However, his bullets simply split in two upon the impossibly sharp sword, allowing Uetsu to close the gap between them and carve Lille in two, blood spraying from his body as his arm is severed and he's killed, the Quincy dropping to the floor in a pool of crimson. Admittedly, I still find this moment to be a little weird. Upon his resurrection later on, Lille mentions that he always had access to the true power of the X-Axis, but simply didn't have time to use it. But I don't see how that's possible when he spends time talking with Uetsu and watching the fight unfold before his very eyes, plus the whole point of the X-Axis is that it's supposed to be an instant blast. There's nothing you can do about it. It feels like Lille has to go out of his way, I would say, to fire reishi bullets instead, so this still seems odd to me. However, speaking of resurrection, Yhwach revives his fallen Schutzstaffel warriors using the power of the Auswählen, which steals the power and life of unnecessary Quincy and redistributes it to those in need, reviving and enhancing them. Using his newly strengthened power, or not, apparently, Lille shoots Uetsu through the shoulder before striking him successfully through the chest, the X-Axis decimating Tenjiro and Hikifune's defenses as they try to protect their comrade. Before we continue, I think it's worth discussing the anime additions to this character so far, most of which crop up right here. As Uetsu is rescued and revived by the Zero Division, the fight continues with Lille battling Uetsu at the top of the Cage of Life. I think I've mentioned this before, but Lille's Vollständig is revealed to be a kind of emerald green colour in the anime, and I've got to be honest, if his entire form is that colour when we see Zilliel in the future, I think that's going to look a little bit strange and maybe be a bit much. I always kind of imagined it just being like a warm, white, yellowish light, but a bright green? That's going to be interesting. Back to the fight, however, although Uetsu is faster than Lille, capable of reaching the Sternritter and swinging for him with his blade, Lille's true power is teased as Uetsu's blade passes right through him. While Uetsu tries to work out what's happening, Lille continues firing shots at the Royal Guard member, with Uetsu eventually positioning himself in line with Yhwach, hoping Lille won't want to injure his king. Unfortunately, Uetsu has miscalculated the capabilities of the X-Axis and Lille shoots him down anyway. As the Zero Division appear defeated, Lille watches as three of them suddenly slit their own throats, dying on the spot and enabling Senjumaru to activate her bankai. With her bankai active, Senjumaru surrounds Lille in tapestries which transform into mirrors, foreshadowing his eventual defeat at the hands of Nanao's Shinken Hakyoken. Lille tries to blast the mirrored Senjumaru but shoots himself instead, collapsing to the ground as he's imprisoned by the fabrics. At the time of recording, we don't yet know how Lille and the other Schutzstaffel members will escape the clutches of Shatatsu Karagara Shigarami no Tsuji. We just know they will. Returning to the source material, Lille doesn't reappear after the battle with the Zero Division until Ichigo and his friends confront Yhwach in the Soul King's throne room. Arriving with his feathery wings still for some reason that he received during the Auswählen, this will either be completely removed in the anime or replaced with his half-formed Vollständig again. Lille prepares to face off with Chad, Orihime, and Ganju, but watches as Ichigo and the others are sent flying from the palace. Lille then prepares to shoot Ichigo as he falls, but Uryu gets to him first, slinging an arrow at his former friend and supposedly proving his loyalty to the Schutzstaffel. Although Lille seems suspicious, Gerard openly accepts Uryu regardless. The Schutzstaffel then gather as Yhwach prepares to absorb the power of the Soul King for himself. As Yhwach staggers, unable to contain the full extent of the Soul King's Reiryoku, Lille offers him his hand, but is shocked when the Soul King's power suddenly flows from Yhwach, thousands upon thousands of tiny, black, eyeball monsters enveloping the Sternritter like a tidal wave of water. Although Lille is taken aback, Hashwolf reassures him that the Soul King's only enemy is the Shinigami. Later, as Yhwach absorbs all of the Soul King's power, Lille sits with the other Schutzstaffel in some kind of lounge area. As he cleans and polishes his gun, Lille wonders if there's something else they should be doing right now, but Askin reminds him that they can't get near Yhwach without the threat of being swallowed up themselves. As Gerard wonders why Uryu looks so down, Lille seems suspicious of him once again, keeping a watchful eye on the boy. Once Hashwolf senses Yhwach has finished draining the Soul King of all of his power, he leads the Schutzstaffel back into the throne room. There, Lille, along with the others, is horrified by Yhwach's grotesque transformation and watches as his king obliterates the ceiling of the palace in a display of raw power. As the palace quakes and ruptures around them, Lille lands safely upon a piece of debris. By the time Yhwach has restructured the royal palace in his image and forged the Tower of Varvelt to be the cornerstone of their new world, Lille and the other Schutzstaffel bow before him. They ready themselves for war against the remaining cabal of enemies now converging upon them. Lille then heads to one of the 5 corners of the city, readying himself to face the oncoming invaders. From his hidden perch atop a tower, Lille begins to snipe the Shinigami as they make their way through the streets towards the centre of Varvelt. Lille identifies Hisagi as easy prey as the injured lieutenant falls behind and shoots him through the shoulder, taking him out. Over time, Lille manages to snipe several more Shinigami, drastically reducing the number of fighters they actually have. While it's not confirmed who Lille manages to strike with his shots, we can surmise who he actually took down based on who makes it to the centre of the city later, while the captains and vice-captains confirm that everyone else has long been taken down. So using this information, it seems Lille was able to take down Hisagi, Isane, Kyone, Sentaro, and perhaps most surprisingly Soifon, while Omaida makes it to Gerard unscathed. Deciding Lille has taken out too many of their fighters, Kyoraku turns to face him only to be shot square in the chest. However, in doing so, Lille has given away his position and Kyoraku appears behind him, slicing off the barrel of Lille's rifle as the two prepare to fight. With Kyoraku and Nanao engaging the Sternritter, the rest of the remaining Gotei 13 fighters are now free to continue onwards without fear of being picked off one by one. Now, I've talked in great, exhaustive detail about Kyoraku and Nanao versus Lille before in one of my Bleach battle analysis videos. In fact, to this day, it's the most popular of that series I've ever done, so I'm not going to reiterate every detail here. Suffice it to say, though, that even with the fight's controversial ending, I still think it's one of the best battles of the 1000-Year Blood War arc. It's the kind of spectacle that the final battles of an arc really deserve to be. Firstly, it's a massive fight, taking an entire volume's worth of chapters to finish. Secondly, it's a great showcase for all characters involved. It would have been nice, as I said, if Kubo could have fit some backstory for Lille in somewhere, and I hope we get that in the anime, but regardless, it's very well put together all the same, telling an excellent and dramatic theatrical story as we see both Lille and Kyoraku pushing each other to their respective limits. The start of the fight is probably my favourite part. It's got a weirdly old school vibe to it and feels like a battle straight out of the Arrancar arc, full of back and forth banter between the two sides as both both Lille and Kyoraku demonstrate their powers and skills to great effect, with some really nice choreography woven in. Watching Lille successfully dodge Kageoni on the first move is a great indication of how skilled he really is, though we shouldn't use that to discredit Stark. After all, the Espada had no idea Kyoraku was even there, let alone that he was about to use an ability he'd never seen before. Meanwhile, Lille admits they have intelligence on everything Kyoraku Shikai can do. But even with all that intel, Lille is forced into his holy form by Kyoraku Shikai. I've never understood why Kyoraku was frozen to the spot after Lille transformed, and it's completely brushed over by Kubo. I wonder if it's a passive power of Lille's actual transformation ritual, something like those who witness the birth of a true angel are rooted to the spot in fear and awe. Even if it is that, like I said, Kubo never explains it, but it allows Lille to land 2 brutal shots on the Captain Commander. As Kyoraku flees from Lille's new form, we see several of its abilities. Now that he's made purely of light, nothing can hurt him, and the Sternritter can even teleport. Teleportation isn't normally possible in Bleach. It might look like it is, but in reality the characters are just moving incredibly fast to a site and destination they can already see. The only time we'd seen true teleportation prior to this was when Aizen transcended during the Deicide arc. But here we see Lille teleporting from high in the sky to inside a building in front of Kyoraku. Of course, Kyoraku manages to eventually defeat Lille's holy form by using his bankai, removing the Sternritter's head. Lille resurrects, however, entering his second form and transforming into a draconic centaur of sorts who pressures and almost kills Kyoraku. Eventually, however, Nanao arrives, and with her captain's help, the two of them defeat Lille by reflecting his own godly power back at him using Nanao's sacred family blade, the Shinken Hakyoken. As Lille's body crumbles, he bursts into a golden glittering array of feathers, all of which fall from Varvelt down to the Seirete far below. Like I said earlier, I honestly wish this had been the end of the fight. It would have given Lille a conclusive, epic defeat, while rewarding Kyoraku and Nanao with a hard-earned kill against one of the strongest enemies of the arc. If I could slightly rewrite the ending of this battle to maybe be less controversial, I'd simply move the events around a bit, as I think that's mostly all it needs. The fight starts as normal, right the way up to Lille activating his holy form. After this, Nanao arrives and uses Shinken Hakyoken to reflect Lille's power back at him, destabilizing the Sternritter and fragmenting his godly strength. However, he doesn't die. Instead, he transforms rapidly into his second form in an effort to finish them off, but Kyoraku kills him for good with his bankai in the end, which is now only capable of destroying Lille thanks to the fragmenting he suffered at the hands of Nanao's blade. Personally, I think this would achieve a few things. It means the fight's ending isn't annoyingly inconclusive while still involving Nanao in a crucial role. But more importantly, it lets Kyoraku win the day with his much anticipated bankai, giving it the recognition it deserved, and I think as well, letting fans feel more satisfied with it after so many years. Anyway, Lille's power rains down upon the Seirete as he emerges as an army of chirping flamingos hell-bent on destroying the Soul Society from down below. Even without his holy powers, this group of Lille birds is still strong enough to do major damage. However, before they can cause too much trouble, a resurrected Izuru Kira appears, cutting down several of them. As the Lille birds converge on Izuru, the 3rd Division's vice captain wonders if he has what it takes to protect the Seirete. And just like that, that's it for Sternritter X The X-Axis Lille Barro. Although his fate is left up in the air in the source material, Can't Fear Your Own World later confirms that all of the Lille birds were destroyed in the end, killing the Sternritter completely. Again, it's disappointing that such a prevalent villain towards the end had such a wishy-washy ending. Even showing the Lille birds being absorbed by Yhwach's final Owls of Aelin would have been better than getting absolutely nothing. Still, Overall, I think this character is mostly a success, and in comparison to many of his fellow Sternritter, really stands out as one of the ones we go the most in-depth with, at least in terms of his power, his fight scenes, and him getting more exposure within the general story. That being said, I would have loved a little more depth behind his conviction, and to have learned more about what makes him so devoted in the first place. There's still plenty of questions to be answered. Why was he the first to receive a shrift? Why does he have such godlike power? Maybe the anime will come through for us on some of these questions in the future. With all of that said and done, Lille is incredibly dangerous and very threatening, able to back up his villainy with real power, and that's key for an antagonist of this caliber, acting as one of the very last obstacles in Bleach itself. Alright guys, but that's it for the video. As always, I really hope you enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below regarding Sternritter X The X-Axis Lille Barro. Do you like this character? Do you enjoy this character? Do you think he works as a villain, especially a late stage villain? I would love to hear all of your opinions down in the comments below. What do you think of his battle with Kyoraku and Nanao? Are you expecting that to get any changes come the anime? Again, do please let me know. And as always, I want to end by saying a massive thank you and giving a huge shout out to my supporters over on Patreon. I really do appreciate each and every one of you so very much. It really does mean the absolute world to me. And if you want to support me over on Patreon as well, you can do just that to get your name in the credits just like this, and to get every video I release completely ad-free. Alright guys, but that's it. Until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.